Hello there and welcome to another BoBeats synthesizer review, and today we are gonna explore granular synthesis. And if you're looking for a granular synth, there are quite a few on the market. For example, the Lemon Drop from Music. We also have the Torso S4, not as powerful as a granular synthesizer, but could be an interesting sampler for some of you. And then we have the Beetle Crab Tempera, which is a really interesting instrument in its own right. It's a very interesting way of playing it. It's also quite a powerful granular synthesizer, and if you want to see a full review of it, let me know in the comments. But today we are exploring what could be described as the final boss of granular synthesizers, the quite impressive Tasty Chips GR Mega. The GR Mega actually comes with some really good presets, and you can also layer them, so there's 4 layers. You can use them to create a massive sound. So here's just a quick example. Just one mono sound. Let's add in the second one. Add in a third and a fourth. And if you want to change any of the sounds, just select that layer, select a new preset, and you can get a totally new sound. And the mixing and matching of presets is actually quite a lot of fun. And while it's best at creating these big cloud-like sounds, it can also do fairly standard synth sounds. And I personally think that granular synths are most fun when you're sampling something like the radio or an acoustic instrument. And what you make with a granular synth is so personal because it depends on what you feed into it. So therefore, I invited a good friend of mine, also a member of my local synth community, to share his explorations with the GR Mega. Since I knew that Maurizio was working with a lot of acoustic instruments, I thought it would be really fun if he could document his process with the GR Mega. Later in the video, he'll explain all of it. In terms of specs, the GR Mega is impressive. It's a stereo granular sampler and synthesizer. It has an impressive 128 grains per voice, with 20 notes of polyphony and a max grain count of 5,000. And this is far superior to something like the Torso S4, which has a limit of 128 grains per tracks. It has an internal storage of 500 gigs, and you also get a USB stick with the synthesizer itself. It's also 4-part multi-timbral. The sounds can be played independently as 4 different sounds, or you could just layer them. It can handle up to 60-minute long samples or 3-minute long samples in granular mode. It has 4 LFOs, 4 envelope, and an extended extensive mod matrix, a low pass filter and a high pass filter, and it can be used to process live incoming audio, though I don't think that's what it's best at. Oh, and there's also 4 insert effects per layer. It's your standard delay, distortion, compression, chorus, flanger, reverbs. And looking at the back of the unit, there is some impressive connectivity. You have 3 USB Type-A, 1 USB Type-C, and using the USB you can connect and power, for example, a MIDI keyboard or an external audio interface if you need a better mic preamp. There's also an Ethernet port and an HDMI, which you can use to output the display to an external display. We have MIDI in and out and through, we have CV connectivity, and you have stereo line output as well as stereo line inputs. Good to know that there's also 5 different modes here on it. So you can use it as a granular synth, but there's also a sampler and a tape mode. Those 2 modes are basically meant for playing back samples as they are, and in the granular mode you're basically granularizing, creating big soundscapes. And here I'm turning the Korg Space Kalimba into something actually useful. And then there's also a phase vocoder mode, which is meant for creating kind of crazy sounds, experimental sounds. But you can actually make some pretty beautiful sounding sounds as well. You know, it's your imagination that sets the limit. And then there's also a slice mode, which lets you divide a sample into different parts. Here I'm recording a rhythm from my Korg Space Kalimba. You can then manually or automatically create slices. And the slices can be played back with, for example, a keyboard, the internal sequencer, or an external sequencer. So here you can see I've taken a loop and it sounds like this. And I've just broken it apart into many tiny slices. But more importantly than the specs is understanding that a granular synth is about exploration. It's about taking something small, like reading from your favorite book, and turning it into something larger.
And the shadow fell upon the land, and the world was riven stone from stone. The oceans fled, and the mountains were swallowed up, and the nations were scattered to the 8 corners of the world. The moon was as blood, and the sun was as ashes. The seas boiled, and the living envied the dead. All was shattered, and all but memory lost, and one memory above all others of him who brought the shadow and the breaking of the world, and him they named Dragon. And the shadow fell upon the land.
So let's try and create a multi-layered sound here on the GR Mega, and as we're doing it I'm gonna try and explain the different functions here. So these 4 buttons here represent the 4 layers of a sound, and these layers can be played back multi-timbrally, so you can use different MIDI channels to play them back. And let's start by trying to sample something. Ooh, this is nice. So I'm just gonna hit record here. The first thing you want to do is normalize the sample. So in the normal sampler mode, you can just play back the sample. You see here, it's moving. And you can choose the start point from where to play it back using the fader. And the fader is nice because it lets you not only move through the sample, but it can also be really important because a sample could have different energies at different parts. So you could use the slider in order to find those special moments and even do that live on the fly. But let's change to the granular mode. And in the granular mode, it's all about the rate and grain size, because the rate and the grain size together determine what we call the density of the sound. And to get that big granular sound, we need a lot of density. So by increasing the rate here, you can hear that we get faster and faster grain generation. And then we increase the size. We try and find a sweet spot, and then we use spray in order to randomize the starting position here of the grain generation. So you can see here we're widening the kind of the field where the grains are being generated. And then we are using pan spray here in order to pan the grains. You can see here if I turn it all the way down, all the grains here are basically mono in the middle, and then we just increase here, and you can see how. Let's quickly add in some effects here. We just hold the menu, press one of these buttons here to quickly go to the menu that we want. So here we can add in, for example, a reverb and maybe a delay. Now on this side we have controls for modulation, filter and effect. So we have a low pass filter and a high pass filter. So let's modulate that. We can just hold down LFO here and turn this knob. And then if we look at the screen here, you can see we have these 4 little boxes here, and they show us the modulation. So we are modulating the cutoff here using LFO number 1. We have rate, we have phase, we have amount here. You can select a different waveform if you want to, and if we do, it changes on the screen here. So it's very clear, visually represented. Over here we have quick controls for the effects. I can select, for example, the large reverb, then I have control over 2 parameters, and the dry and wet levels. If I just want it to be more wet, I can just turn it up here. And down here we have the main controls, and then we have the sequencer controls as well as the preset controls. And this is quite important because you have to save. So if I press save here, it will ask you where you want to save it. So it's patch number 1 here, or in slot patch and in slot 1, and we can save this. So now it's saved to slot number 1 here. And this is important when we're adding more layers, because a layer corresponds also to a slot here. So we have rate control, grain size, we have spray, basically spraying the different small tiny grains across the stereo spectrum here, and the spray knob here sets the area in which the grains are being generated. And then we have direction and scan. So scan lets us select a scan speed at which, you see here, the playhead will move through the sample. And then we have direction, which changes the direction in which the grains are being generated. And then we have panning, just hard panning left and right, and then there's pitch. And over here on the screen we see the current selected envelope. We also see what they call the grain window. Basically this is, think of it as like an envelope or a shape of the grains that are being generated. And we can change this by tilting and by changing the curve. And also, if you hold down here, the shift button, we can get some really wild shapes here. And this can of course be modulated. So if I select an LFO here, I hold down, so as you can see, we have a lot of movement which changes the way that the individual grain sounds. So to add a second sound, I hit Shift, the second layer here, select an empty preset slot, and then I hit Menu and 4 to go to the sampling menu. Here we select the audio interface that I have connected. And the reason why I've connected an audio interface is firstly to show you that it actually works, and secondly because if you're using a microphone you want an audio interface to give you that extra gain, but if you're recording from a line source, just use the inputs over here. Now I'm gonna make a little mono sample here, and yeah, basically in this menu you set up how you want to sample, and then you just hit record in order to sample. So now that we have a sample recorded, it's a good time to take a look at the zooming functionality. So hold Shift here, we can zoom into the waveform, and then we use the fader here in order to set the start point. And then we set start, you see a little flag appears. We zoom out, we scroll here to the end, and we set the end here. And this lets us crop the sample. So you select crop, start, end, execute. Now we have a little sample here that we can play around with.
Soha ando Malmö konsthall. Tai sas imponerat kana dikle le patrietura katar iceia stoica.
So I recorded a third sample here from the radio, just some random talking, and you can see it's jumping around a lot, and that's because I'm modulating this slider here using an LFO. And press layer mix, use these faders as a mixer. But you can also select the 4 envelopes. So we have one for pitch, filter, amp, and an auxiliary one, which is, of course, assignable. So let's create a 4th sound here and sample something. So here we have a little piano sample. And for science and fun, I have turned on MIDI control of all the layers except the 3rd one and turn off the play mode. So these 3 will be played when I play the keyboard. I also want to mention that there has been a steady stream of updates to this device. There has been a lot of updates if you go and check their website. And one thing they have updated is if we go to menu here, go to sampling, you can see the sampling view is updated from previous versions. And you can also here select resampling. Now resampling used to work that you had to resample into one of the layers, but now you can just press record and play. Now I can discard, keep, or load. So I can select an empty preset here and I can choose to load it. And then you have your entire recording here and you could just keep granularizing it, using it as the basis for a new sound, or yeah, keep building on it. Why not use the phase vocoder and mess it up?
Hi, this is Shaper Sound here. Hey Bo, we know ourselves for some time now from our cozy Coffee with Synths, and I can tell you a little bit of my story with this device. The idea I had was to sample these metal instruments I have. Took my bass microphone, started sampling all my gongs and different percussion instruments. But what I wanted to bring for you today, it's a kind of a second step on that exploration, because although I think I went very far with my initial sample library, what I was missing was a quality that I have when playing those instruments, like for instance the gong, live, when you hit those instruments and move them across space. So what I did was to get myself two very transparent microphones to try to capture a little bit more of this movement of the gong in space, and having really this kind of phasing binaural effect that you tend to get when the gong is moving live in front of you, as well as all these different harmonics that it provides. The process to record live requires a few menu steps here, like setting your buffer size and initializing the stereo buffer. But once you are done, you can see it in your patch that you have 2 channels. Then I set my gong in motion here to get the stereo effect. Press record. And I have developed this process that I can give multiple hits and different intensities, so I can choose later which one I want to use. And I have learned that to use the engine sampler is a good way of testing the things you have recorded. Let me find a sweet spot here, not too loud, not too low. Listen. You can hear the difference in volume when the gong moves sideways. But of course, the fun begins when you start messing up with Granular, right? You hear? When the grains are moving forward. Let's mess up a little bit with the direction here. Now it sounds more like Granular. The grains are moving back and forth or in reverse. But you hear the stereo oscillation is from the gongs itself, because my stereo spread is actually very centered. One of the parameters that I liked a lot is this pan spread here. It really widens up the stereo spectrum. I'm sound designing here already. It's tempting, you know, like changing a little bit the grain duration. You have to watch out for the heat of the gong there. But now it's sounding more like granular synthesis. There are many possibilities with this machine. So then I went further, recording other samples from the cello, a Tibetan bowl, and then I also asked a little musician for help on playing the cornet. And then I want to show you my favorite sounds that I could come up with. And the first one I called bow cello, where I wanted to simulate this movement of the bow while using the cello sample. And I added some modulation here with the LFOs to my scanning position to simulate the back and forward movement of the cello bow. Another sound that I thought turned out quite nice was from using the engine sampler to play the bowl. But I wanted to explore more around the granular engine, different envelope shapes for my grains, and modulation. And I came up with this sound. Of a swirling metal moving through space. And this was achieved with a mono sample from my blade and the modulation of my scanning position using LFO1, as well as timing a modulation for the stereo panning. This not only creates this nice visual effect on the GR screen, but also a very nice stereo movement here. Going back again to the sampling of the cello, I wanted to create a patch that sounds more like a continuous string sound. And this worked particularly good on low octaves, and the trick here was achieved by creating a massive amount of grains. But in order to eliminate the artifacts of the grain envelope, the workaround I found was to actually modulate the grain rates. And by varying how much grains are being generated per time, I was able to eliminate some of the grain engine artifacts, allowing for this more continuous string sound. Last but not least, I wanted to explore the sounds of the cornet, and for that I even broke one of my own rules to not create samples that evolve harmonically. Using this little trumpet phrase here so that I could explore some performance possibilities using the slider to navigate through my sample. But the patch that I liked the most while exploring the stereo sampling of the cornet was this sound here. Which sounds a lot like a lo-fi brass instrument. Because it captures the little tuning imperfections of playing a long note in a wind instrument. And then what I always like to do in my process is to try to put separate sounds in the context of a mix.
Thank you so much, Shaper Sounds, for being a part of today's video. And if you haven't already, go and check him out over on YouTube. I'll link him down below. And I just want to end today's video with two things that I think could be improved with the GR Mega. Okay, it ended up being more than two things. 3, 4, maybe 6 things. So the first thing is the effects. They sound good and there's a good variety of effects, but the default settings when you load an effect are kind of weird. So for example, the reverb is always loaded 100% wet, which is kind of weird since it's an insert effect and it's very rare that you want it 100% wet. So I think that taking a look at the default settings for the effects would be really good. I found it quite frustrating whenever I loaded in an effect that I had to change a number of things to make it sound okay. And secondly, I think that the menu system could do with a bit of work, and especially making it more appealing, easier to understand. It could look better. For example, if you take a look at the sampling menu, it just feels like it's a long list of things. There's nothing that really clearly separates different settings graphically from one another, and it's kind of hard to orient yourself unless you're very familiar with the device. And I think I understand why they aren't focusing that much on the look of the UI, because they are refining and adding things, and I know they have a lot of things they want to add in the future. I think multi-sampling isn't in the device, for example, might come later. So I understand that they might not want to spend a ton of time on the look before they know exactly that they have all the features in there, but I would have have loved it if it was just a bit cleaner, a bit easier to navigate, and easier to understand where everything is and what it does. For example, if you change the sampling length, you have to initialize a mono or stereo recording. Now, this is something you understand if you've developed the synth, but it's not something that you understand if you're just a regular user. So these are things that could be explained a lot better with better graphics and maybe simplifying the UI a bit. Oh, and a third thing that I really want to mention, the gain staging on the GR Mega can be a little bit of a headache sometimes. It's very easy that the sound distorts if you, for example, push an effect too hard or if you're not careful with levels. And I'm not sure what Tasty Chips should do to improve this, but I can just say that gain staging can be a little bit annoying, especially when you're adding a lot of effects. And I also want to briefly mention the price. This is a pricey synthesizer, and if you want a granular synth, there are cheaper options. However, I also think that the GR Mega has the specs to back up the price. It's a very, very powerful synthesizer, but I think that Tasty Chips would do well to add the multi-sampling that they've talked about, because adding more sampling functionality and making it a sampling powerhouse would go a long way to make the price seem reasonable. But beside these two things, I think that the GR Mega is a pretty solid synth, and I can't wait to see what they have in store for the future with future firmware updates. So I hope you all have a great day. Talk to you later.